Welcome back, everyone. Wow, I have a great episode for you today. I didn't know where this was going to go. It is with Joel Friedland, and he is the principal at Brit Properties. Today was my first time meeting him, and it was fascinating. Today's episode is about gambling in business. So if that strikes you as intriguing, be sure to like and subscribe. Listen to the entire episode. Joel shares an amazing story with us. We get into the ins and outs of business partnership and also investing. I know it's one you guys are going to love, but most importantly, enjoy the episode and happy Thanksgiving. Wherever you are and however you are listening, thank you so much for being back with us on another episode of Winning the Moment. Today, I've got Joel Friedland with me, and he is the principal at Brit Properties. And we usually will have a little bit of a discussion off camera as we get ready for today's episode. And Joel brought up a really interesting topic, and that is gambling in business. And so my brain is already percolating, so I can't wait to hear what Joel has to say about it. But Joel, welcome to Winning the Moment podcast. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Cody. Great to be with you.
So tell me, what do you mean when you say gambling in business? What does that mean to you?
So I am in the real estate business. And have you ever heard the term deal junkie?
No.
Okay. Well, people who are deal makers, people who work in the world of real estate or in private equity, sometimes they say, I'm a deal junkie. And I think that's really bad. They may be trying to say that they enjoy making deals, they enjoy the process of making deals, but I don't think if someone said to you, hey, I'm a junkie, that you would say, oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Right? So why is it good to be an anything junkie? And I think there's a tremendous amount of risk in the business world that people who are entrepreneurs, especially young entrepreneurs, don't see, because when you think, hey, I'm an entrepreneur, I take risk. The question is, when is it a risk? When's it a business risk? And when is it gambling? Because you don't have to walk into a casino to be a gambler.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting perspective. So I just, in my main business, which is I'm in hospitality, that's my day job. And I had bought out my business partner at the end of last year. So that was, that you could consider that a risk or a gamble, right? But I had all of the information that I needed. We've been in business for 7 years. I knew the ins and outs of the industry. I understood what I was paying him and what our revenue was going to look like, and I was able to forecast and project. And so even though it was a risk because we had to, come up with the funds to be able to do the buyout, I wouldn't have considered that a gamble because I don't have that much information when I do gamble on sports. You know what I mean? If I did, I would win a lot more.
Yeah, well, gambling can become a disease. And gambling can become a compulsion when somebody gets so much of a dopamine rush and so much of an adrenaline rush from gambling, whether they win or lose. There have been movies about this. What Vince Vaughn was in a movie about a guy who had a gambling problem. And I think Richard Gere was in a movie where he had a gambling problem. And a lot of people get in trouble. Marriages end because of it, and partnerships in business end because of it. One of the biggest risks, I think, which is a gamble, is when you do become partners with someone and you don't know them well enough, and you go in with them and you don't protect yourself well enough to determine if you've made a terrible mistake or not before it's too late. That is gambling in and of itself. I've done it. And it ended extremely badly. All rock groups eventually break up except for maybe the Rolling Stones. And the reason is because people have egos and they don't have written agreements. And to an extent, when you go into a partnership, even as a musician or an artist with another partner, you've heard of Simon and Garfunkel?
Yeah.
They were partners. They hate each other's guts. They went into something and it turned into lawsuits and creating enemies of each other. So there's all different ways to get into trouble gambling. And it's not just gambling on sports or at the horse races, or a lot of people get into huge trouble as traders in the stock market.
Yeah, we had the episode before yours, Tony Christensen on, and he's an advisor now, but he took a like an investment class in college, and it was paper stocks, paper trading, and so it wasn't real money. And he was like, "Oh, this is great! Like, I could I could totally do this in real life." And they had gotten some like grant money or something. He was young and newly married, and then he lost it all like in the course of a class, because he hadn't done it for real yet. And it wasn't a lot of money because they were a young married couple, but it was like all the money that they had.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something else that you may or may not be aware of. People who are gamblers, sometimes, most of the time, they don't know it, but most people who are gamblers are also tremendous liars. And they'll lie and they'll say anything. And it's a character defect that is related to the character defect of making impulsive decisions with your money, not thinking it through and being stupid and losing it. And so what happens with people who gamble, whether it's casino gambling or sports gambling, if people who get deep into it, I've studied this at length, and people who get deep into this have a series of character defects that are extremely common with the other people who have that problem. It ruins marriages. It ruins relationships between friends. Gambling is major. So the thing that I've been studying is what is gambling in business and what isn't.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious to know, and what are those character defects?
So first of all, gigantic ego and insecurity.
Ego and
That's a
insecurity.
huge one. Where there's this feeling that you're going to show the world what a big shot you are. So it's called big shotism. So people who can barely afford to live in their house go out and they buy a car, and they can't afford the car. And so let's say they go buy a Maserati and it's $1,500 a month. Why are they doing it if they can't afford it? And the answer is because some insecurity or some issue that's a character defect makes them need to feel like a big shot.
Yeah. Perception.
Yeah. And it doesn't really help them feel like a big shot. All it really does is it feeds their insecurity, because they know they're paying for something that they can't afford, and eventually they're going to wash out.
It's kind of like what happened in 2008, when people were outspending their means, because they would get those interest only loans, and then they'd maybe even pull money out of their houses and use that money, like their HELOCs, to buy, toys, ATVs and boats and things like that. And it was all just leveraged, nothing was real.
Guess what? They're doing it now.
That's not surprising.
No.
What, do you think it's to the same level?
Yeah, I think it might be worse.
Wow, really? Why do you say that?
Well, because the internet drives people to want to compete with other people. And it's sort of like, you feel like, I've heard you say this, or someone you talked to said this, when you're living your life, you're in your own race, run your own race.
Yeah.
And if you're comparing yourself to someone who's at the end of a race that's already worked really hard and done something, and you want to be like them, just because you get the same car they have doesn't mean you're like them. You haven't done the work yet.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And for all you might be financing your car and they may have paid cash for it, or maybe it was a tax purchase because they needed the depreciation that year or something like that. You don't know the background.
Or maybe they're just really rich and they can afford it.
Yeah. Yeah. Or that.
Yeah.
So what made
go ahead.
What made you intrigued on this topic? Like, what made you want to dive into this and study the topic of gambling?
Because I figured out that I was gambling in business.
Interesting. Did you gamble on sports too?
No, never. I didn't care about sports enough to gamble on it. If I had cared about it enough, I might have. I have a lot of friends and relatives who are major sports gamblers, some of whom have gotten in trouble because they just went too deep. Others one guy sold a hotel and he had so much money, it didn't matter. He could lose $1,000 a game. It didn't matter to him.
Yeah.
And if you look at some of these athletes who are, I've gone to casinos and I've seen the high rollers table at blackjack where there were professional basketball players playing with a dealer for $1,000 a hand.
Yeah.
Some people can afford it, but there's some actors, for example, Hollywood people that have a major gambling problem. If you look them up, you'll see that there are marriages that have been ruined by it. And by the way, most people uh, who are gamblers uh, understand, once they figured out that they're gamblers, that they have an addictive personality and they're compulsive about a lot of things.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I mean, I like to gamble myself. Like I love to do it. But what's funny is so I've got like this app called Better. And so I like to gamble, but I'm also very conservative and risk adverse. And so like last night, for example, I picked like player bets and I put them together. So I picked 5 players last night in the Golden State and Mavericks game, and I bet $2. But if I won $40. So I'm risking, basically nothing. And I'm doing it in the thrill of trying to turn 2 into 40, right? And I got 4 of the 5 picks right, and then I had Luka Doncic. I needed him to get 2 either rebounds, points, or assists. It didn't matter. It could be 1 rebound, 1 assist, 1 bucket. And he had 4 minutes and 30 seconds left in the game. And he did nothing. He just stood around and did nothing. And so I lost. Luckily, I had hedged my bet with a halftime bet, and I took the under on his points. And so I bet.
Oh, so you're an accomplished gambler, so you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. So do you gamble in business, do you think?
No, because I'm too conservative, risk adverse. So I'd say, I would say sometimes that my aversion to risk has limited my potential for growth, but it's also kept me secure. So I think.
Was it a gamble when you went into business with your partner?
No, I don't think so. We had been best friends for a very long time and knew each other really well, and we were a good yin and yang. We're completely different. We're not at all the same. So he had strengths that I didn't have, and vice versa. And ultimately ended up just not fulfilling him anymore, and that's why he ended up leaving the company at the end of last year. But even going through that process, it was very amicable, and there was like not any issues whatsoever as we negotiated the terms. But it was scary for me because like we leveraged our house, we got a HELOC in order to be able to purchase the business, and so I don't like that kind of debt. I wanted to eliminate that as quickly as we could. And so that was my whole focus this year was doing everything I could to eliminate that, because I felt like until the business had ridded itself of that debt, I couldn't deem it successful. And so, yeah, I don't feel like that one was a gamble. But I've had partnerships that haven't worked out. We had some people on our team that wanted a part of that company that we had. And so we're too far along to give them ownership of that. So we started a new one for them. And the 2 people that we started it for, neither one of them are with the company anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. So how you structure partnerships is either, the way I look at it, is either really well thought out or it's very impulsive. And I'm going to tell you that impulsive structuring of partnerships is gambling. 100% it's gambling.
Yeah.
So somebody who says, hey, I'm going to go into partnership with this person who I know, especially when they don't know them well.
Yeah.
But if you're going to go into business with somebody and you know them somewhat well, but you don't know exactly what the business mentality is of that person, you know what they are as a friend, you know what they are as a golfer, you know what they are as an enthusiast of some hobby that you're in, you can't really tell if you're going to be good business partners. And what most people do is they start out with a very weak partnership agreement that has a lot of open-ended sections to it, where things that come up that were unexpected all of a sudden become a conflict between the partners, where one sees it one way and one sees it the other way.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest ways of gambling is ignoring the fact that you're disagreeing on something and pretending that you're not, and letting that go for a long time, because that blows up.
Yeah.
So let me tell you the story of my partnership. I was 30, and right now I'm 65. So I've got 35 years of a look back on this mistake. And if anybody who watches this or hears this podcast, if it can help them in any way, I would say that this is the greatest lesson that I've ever learned. I hired a guy to be in my real estate business. We were in the business, and I still am, of buying industrial buildings, which are warehouse and manufacturing buildings, and leasing them to companies that manufacture products. We have all kinds of tenants. We've got anything from food manufacturers to metal manufacturers for airplane parts. And I brought in this young guy. I was 30 and he was 23. And I found him, believe it or not, just through networking. Somebody knew him, they put us together. And my dad was a psychologist who specialized in testing people to see if they were good at things, like at certain activities that would be important in a job. So my dad tests this guy, and he calls me up after testing this guy at my dad's office, and he said, "Oh, you got to hire this guy. You better bring him in. He is the most aggressive, smart, capable, amazing guy. He's going to do so great in your business. He's going to find you deals to buy. He's going to negotiate deals. This guy is great." Now, he was 23. He said he played football on a full scholarship at his college. He was the quarterback of his football team in high school. Guy was 6'5", good looking. I met him and I thought, this guy one day could run for president. I mean, he's just so accomplished. He's so amazing. And he worked for me and I trained him. I became his mentor. I believe strongly in mentorship. I've mentored 70 people in real estate.
And you were a decade older than him at this time, is that right? 33 and 23?
Roughly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one day I said to him, you should be a partner with me sometime. You're amazing. And we were making money together. We were doing deals together, but I was really in charge of everything. He was the young mentee.
And what was his role? What was his role with your company at that time?
Finding deals to buy. He became what's called a deal junkie. He was looking for deals to buy. We were buying buildings for $2 million and $4 million and $5 million and $7 million. And he would go out and find a deal. There was a Budweiser distributor that occupied a 100,000 square foot building. And my partner called this guy on a cold call. He stopped in to see him just on a hunch. There weren't any cars in the parking lot. And he walked in and he said, "Hey, you're not doing much with your business. There's no cars in your parking lot." And the Budweiser distributor, who was a multimillionaire, locally known person, invited him in and said, Anheuser-Busch, Budweiser's owner, wants us to move out of Chicago. They're taking over my business. It's going to be corporately run. And they're giving me a franchise in another smaller city, Oklahoma City. And I couldn't say no to them because we don't even have a signed contract. So my partner said to him, "Well, I'd love to buy your building." And this fellow, George, said, "Well, how much would you pay?" My partner said, I'll pay you $3 million. And George said, "Interesting. That was the number I had in mind." So Dave comes back to the office and he says, "Joel, I've got a deal. I'm buying a building for $3 million and I'm sure it's worth $4 million. We could sell it tomorrow for $4 million. The guy just needs to sell it." I said, "Great, let's do it." So we bought the building, and Dave was right. We sold it to a neighbor that was 3 doors away within 60 days for $4 million. We made $1 million profit.
Wow. And how long did that take from him stopping in till selling it?
90 days.
That's incredible.
All right. Guess what? Dave and I did that 40 times.
Wow.
40 times. Guess what happened? We got more and more cocky. I got my fancy car. He got his Beamer. He got his fancy house in the city, $1.5 million house. I got my $1 million house in the suburbs. And boy, we were just going at it. Now, what I didn't know was that I was gambling. I didn't realize it. I didn't see it.
Yeah. When he said, "I got this building for 3, it's worth 4," and you said, "Let's do it." Did you do any due diligence, or did you just say?
No, I trusted him.
Yeah. Okay. That's my question.
Okay. I trusted him. And it worked out, right? It's like if you bet on Michigan and they're playing Indiana and Michigan wins, you're a hero. Right? You're smart. You knew it. You knew the quarterback was better and you knew that the defense was better. It's not that different from betting on a game. If you sort of know what you're doing, you don't have to be great at it, but you also might not do all the homework. But here's the worst part. Big players in business borrow a lot of money.
Yeah.
So how do you think we bought the Budweiser building? We went to our bank. Bank's called Union National Bank of Elgin, a small bank. The banker's our friend. And we said, we need to close on this in 30 days. We need $3 million. And we got an appraisal within 3 weeks that said it was worth $4 million. The seller walked away. We never talked to him again. He went to Oklahoma City.
And the seller didn't care that it appraised at 4 million. He was fine to sell it for 3.
Seller doesn't know what it appraises for. Only the bank. Only the bank does, and only we do.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we borrowed the whole 3 million. So we made $1 million with no investment.
Yeah.
Right? We made $1 million with no investment. We bought a building for $6 million right near Wrigley Field here in Chicago. And we had a company that went out of business. And this is one where I got it. I called up this guy I knew. I said, I hear you're going out of business. He says, yeah, I've got a building. You want to buy it? I said, $6 million. He says, make it $6.5 million. I said, okay. So we ended up looking at it and found out the roof was bad. And the roof replacement was $500,000. So I went to Mike and I said, hey, Mike, I can't pay you 6.5. We have to spend $500,000 on the roof. I can only pay you $6 million. He said yes. We borrowed $5 million. And within about 6 months, 7 months, we were approached by someone who knew that we bought the building, and they said, we'd like to buy the building, and they agreed to pay us $9 million.
I'm in the wrong business, baby. I got to start selling buildings.
Well, you're not going to like the ending of this story. This story has a bad ending. It's got a really bad ending. So now we're cocky suckers, right? We're driving our fancy cars. We're coining millions of dollars. We've got investors who go in with us. Everybody puts in $100,000. We've got like 200 people trusting that we're going to do the right thing with their money. And boy, we were trying to. And what happens? 2008.
Oh, wow. That's what 2008 was about. So you got hit with that. You were in it.
Okay. So I had 50 buildings with Dave and 200 partners. My family had invested. My best friends had invested. And we had about $150 million worth of property, and we had about $120 million worth of debt at 7 banks. And then the shit hit the fan with the economy internationally. And some of our tenants, we had a lot of single tenant buildings, and a lot of our tenants couldn't pay the rent and ended up having to go out of business. So of the 50 buildings, we had 10 that were upside down, which means we owed more to the bank than we had in equity. So if we were to sell, there would be a short sale.
And how did you get upside?
You can have a short sale on a $7 million building. It's like having a short sale on a $300,000 house. If the house is only worth $200,000 and your mortgage is $250,000, you've got a problem. And so we got into that, and Dave and I had a partnership agreement. And guess what it did? It identified how to split profits. It did not identify how to split losses.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And it wouldn't
identify what happens, because we had guaranteed all 50 loans at the 7 banks.
So
the banks required personal guarantees.
What was your ownership breakdown percentage wise between you and Dave?
40-40, and we had 3 other partners who had 20% between them.
Okay. And so the losses aren't just equal percentages of ownership?
Well, there's something called, this is a little technical, it's called joint and several debt guarantees, which means the lender can go after either or both to any extent they want, or neither. But I'm on the hook for the whole thing, and Dave's on the hook for the whole thing. But I'll give you one worse. We also decided in our brilliance, when things were going great, that we were going to start our own debt fund. I don't know if you know what a debt fund is. That's where you have a bunch of people that put money in and you loan it to other people, and then those other people theoretically pay you interest.
Kind of like hard money loans, basically.
We were doing hard money loans.
Yeah.
We had $7 million worth.
Wow.
And in 2008, what we thought was backed by $14 million worth of equity in properties turned out to be worth about $3 million. So we were $4 million underwater.
And those 50 properties that weren't worth what you owed on them, was that because the economy shifted and the properties weren't worth as much, or is it that you overpaid for them?
No, we didn't overpay when we bought them, but when values go down.
Okay, so it was just the value transition from the economy going down.
Yeah. So if you had a house in 2008 in certain markets and you had paid $500,000 for the house might be worth 250.
Yeah, right.
So if we bought a building for 7 million, it might be worth somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 million.
So it was never that you guys were bad purchasers. You just got hit with the economy.
Oh, I'm going to say this like with in tongue in cheek, kind of sarcastically. We were brilliant. We were making money left and right. Our investors were, yeah, Yahoo, attaboy. You know, we'd be sending them checks for hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was great, but there was a lot of debt and there was a lot of risk, and the partnership agreement wasn't clear. And even if the partnership agreement was clear, you could have a great partnership agreement, but it doesn't stop one of the partners from running away and declaring bankruptcy and leaving the other one holding the bag. That did not happen with us. We went through the hell together, but it turned out it was not a great partnership because we didn't see things eye to eye as to how to solve this problem.
Yeah.
When I say the problem, I'm talking about 50 problems with buildings, because if 10 are bad, even if 40 are good, the banks put you in something called workout. That's where these totally like despicable people, and anyone listening to this who's in the workout department, yes, chances are you're despicable. Because what they do is they come after people in a way that is just so obnoxious and rude. We had 40 good buildings and we had 10 that were in trouble. We had 5 buildings at one particular bank where one was in trouble. And this woman came at us like with delight. You're going to pay us down on that one bad building, and I'm putting your other 4 buildings into workout, which means you're going to have to pay the loans down, and we're going to have to watch everything you do, and we're going to take all of the rent, and we're going to put it in our bank, and you're not going to have any right to make any decisions. We're taking over everything. We had 4 good buildings. We just had one bad one. And I said to this woman, Karen, I said,
her name was Karen for real?
Her name was Karen.
That's awesome.
I said, Karen, seriously, we've been great borrowers. Just last year, we went and played golf with Jim, the president of the bank. She's, well, Jim's not involved. Now it's mine. I'm in charge of this. And we need you to pay down those 4 others because we're concerned about your viability. And I said, we just have one problem. We'll work it out. Let's figure it out. Yeah, well, we'll be figuring out and we'll be seeing you in court. You're going to pay it. We're going to sign agreements. You're going to increase your interest rate. It was obnoxious. So what did I learn? Well, I learned a lot.
I'd imagine.
First of all, I learned that debt can kill you. Can kill you. When I first started my business, when I was in my 20s, I was in my late 20s, I borrowed a lot of money on my credit cards because I had invested so much. We didn't have enough money to live on. My wife was nervous as hell. And we were living literally hand to mouth until things worked out. And they did because I worked hard and I got lucky. So that was a big risk. I didn't realize that that was gambling too.
Yeah.
But it was. But at the age of 29, if you're taking a lot of risk, you can recover when things go bad. You can start over again.
Yeah.
But that's not always the case. Someone could get sick. Someone could get MS or cancer or something, and you wash out. You might not be able to start over again.
Well, and so what was the resolution? So you guys didn't agree, but you worked through it. So what did you guys come out on the other side? What happened?
Multiple lawsuits, incredible despair with our families because we were at each other's throats.
Because they had invested with you also.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I had two brothers and my parents, and Dave had his parents and his friends. We were all in it together. And when things went bad, the agreement wasn't quite clear on how that worked. So everybody went to their corners. It was like a boxing match. I was in my corner, he was in his corner. The referee was the courts.
And so was that called Epic or Savage Realty? Was that those companies?
Yeah, that was Epic Savage.
Epic Savage, okay.
Epic
And
Savage.
so you guys are going, when you say that you're going against each other, you and Dave?
Yeah, you know what my lawyer said? He said he would go home and tell his wife, these two guys are like two people who are tied together back to back, and they both have knives in each hand, and they're stabbing behind themselves, trying to kill the other guy. Because the banks had us all tied up, and yet we were swiping at each other with knives.
And do you have a relationship with Dave today?
Dave has passed away.
Oh, he has. That's sad.
Yeah. And I'll tell you the craziest thing. I had bought life insurance on myself and the other younger partners and Dave.
Like a buy-sell agreement?
Like a key man insurance policy.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And before all this got resolved, Dave got a horrible case of cancer and passed away.
Wow.
Yeah. And he appointed
before it even got resolved. So I wonder if the stress of it all had anything to do with his decline in his health.
I can't imagine that it was unrelated.
Yeah.
He had such a wonderful family. I loved his parents. I loved his wife. I loved him. But when it went bad, it went bad.
Sure.
And the life insurance policy was in the millions of dollars, and we owed millions. And Dave had appointed somebody, a fellow named Dan, to be Dave's representative when he was so sick that he couldn't function. And Dan and I worked everything out, and Dave passed away while we were working it out, and the insurance proceeds paid virtually all of the money that we owed to all those people. And we came out not quite even, but we came out without having to declare bankruptcy. And Dan was an amazing man. He owned a very large company, and he didn't really do this for the money. He was paid to do it, but he did it because he was a friend of Dave's, and he handled himself so well that, on a scale of 1 to 10, if you were to rate a person 1 to 10, like a person could be so great, they're a 10. Dan was an 11. So he was just so great. He handled the widow. He handled my situation. But I walked away from the whole thing, tying this thing into a neat little bow about.
And what year was this? Like because 2008 is when the downfall started. How long until you did?
7 years to resolve it. We didn't resolve it until 7 years later.
Wow.
So we went through a lot of hell because of.
That's a long time.
A very long time. And we each had new businesses that we were running while we were still trying to save the old business and save everybody's money and not let it go. So it all worked out in the end to an extent. It didn't work out well for Dave because he died, and it didn't work out well for the people that got in our way. We spent $2 million on legal fees between us.
Oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I told you, my dad told me he was the greatest guy ever. And while we were partners and things were going great, he was. I'm sure I was a bad partner too when things went bad.
Yeah.
You have to look at yourself. You can't just say, oh, blame the other guy.
Sure.
I was in on it when we bought the 50 buildings and we borrowed the gigantic amount of over $100 million of bank debt. So it was a situation where the intentions were good, but I will say that it became gambling because we were borrowing too much and didn't see that the economy could crash. And what I'm saying today is that this is a world today. 2008 was 16 years ago, 17 years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
16.
Right? The economy now feels very much like it did in 2007, right before it crashed in 2008. We're seeing a stock market that's at an all-time high, Bitcoin at an all-time high, real estate, people can't afford to buy a house because they're too expensive. We've got $36 trillion of debt as a country. it's bigger than everybody. It's bigger than everybody. So I look back and I said, what did I do that I can avoid that mistake next time? And so this is the answer that I came up with. I now do deals with very, very little debt. I've got a lot of buildings. I have a $70 million portfolio of 19 industrial buildings. I've got 200 investors, and my job is to keep them safe and not let that ever happen again, and not gamble whatsoever. So there's three things that you have to do to not gamble. The first one is you have to not take on too much debt. Because gambling, you can bet on a game and it can be $2. That's not putting your life at risk.
Yeah, right.
But when it's in business, you have to be really careful with debt.
How do you determine that debt parameter?
Boy, it's freaking hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard because you keep thinking, hey, if I borrow a little more, I'll get that next customer. We've got a couple of clients in the food business. They make desserts, and they both do really, really great. And then sometimes they lose a big account where they're supplying somebody that stops buying their products. And they've built up the business and they have 200 employees and they've got rent that costs them $1 million a year. And you borrow $20 million to run a business like that and you lose a big customer, it's a giant problem. So it can happen not only in real estate, but in any business.
Sure.
You get in over your head. People get rich borrowing and getting lucky because nothing bad happens to them, or the bad things happen and they can get through it and maybe they learn from it. I think that's how I look at our situation. We learn from it. We won't repeat it. We'll make other mistakes, but we aren't going to borrow too much. So now I do all my deals totally debt-free or with a maximum loan-to-value ratio, which means the percentage borrowed against the value of the building of 30%.
Okay, so 30% LTV.
30, yeah. Most people borrow 60 or 70%.
Yeah.
It's not safe. And a lot of people got wiped out over the past couple of years when interest rates went up and they had floating rate debt. We were in a situation, luckily, because I learned from Dave's and my experience, that many of our buildings have no debt. And so when rates went up, I saw these people who were my friends and I said, oh my God, they're going through what I went through in 08. The banks are coming at them and they can't afford it and they might have to go bankrupt. And in our case, the deals we put together, we bring in 40, 50, 60 investors. And I tell them, we're going to buy this particular building all cash, no mortgage, because what I went through in 2008 is something that I never want to repeat. And I don't want to ever bring anybody into a situation like that.
Were you scared at all to pursue your next endeavor after you went through all of that?
Really scared. Yes. Incredibly scared. And there was a show called Scared Straight that took place in a prison. You remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Well, scare people by putting them in a spot where they're in big trouble and they never want to be there again. And that's what happened to me. So debt was number one. Number two, and this is really important, you can borrow money and you can take risk, but you've got to do your homework, which means work. It's like work. I listened to one of your podcasts and someone mentioned, maybe it was you, to become an expert at something, you have to spend 10,000 hours at it.
Yeah, that's Malcolm Gladwell. I just stole it from him. I borrowed it.
Okay.
But
so
yeah,
I heard you quoting him. Right, right. So in our business, the surest way to not get in trouble is to do your homework and be an expert. So we specialize only in industrial real estate and only in Chicago. We're laser focused. There's 15,000 industrial companies in Chicago. And I'd say I've been in at least 2/3 of those buildings. So I know the market really well. And if you have the edge of market knowledge, no matter what business you're in, that takes a lot of the gambling out of it. It's someone who just says, well, I don't know, let's try this. I don't know, I'm not sure. And they take a risk like you'd bet on a game without doing any homework at all.
Well, they say, stick to your niches and get riches, right? Like the smaller your niche, the smaller your niches, the bigger your riches, right? The more laser focused you are on one thing, because you don't know what the market is in California or in Florida, and so you'd be starting all over again versus having such a
Yeah.
detailed
Well, I'd
experience.
go to Florida. I'd go to Miami, and some guy who's been in the business like I have for 43 years, or I'll go down there and make some kind of a stupid decision because I don't know, and they're going to eat my lunch.
Yeah.
That's
So
crazy.
why did you choose Chicago in the beginning?
Well, first of all, I got lucky. I live here and I grew up here, and this is where all my contacts are, and this is where all my family is. And it just happens to be the best industrial real estate market in the United States.
Oh, interesting.
It's right where all the railroad um, companies converge.
Converge.
And it's also where all of the highways converge. So if you've got a business in New York and you're shipping products to California or to New Mexico or Nevada or to you in St. George, it's got to go through the highway system. It's going to go on one of the major arteries, like 80, for example. And we're right in the middle. We're right where it happens, right there. And we have one more thing. We've got incredibly fresh water to no end. It's an endless supply of water from the Great Lakes.
Yeah. Are you in the city of Chicago? Or are you in the suburbs? Where do you live?
I live in the suburbs, and our buildings are all over the place. We have 7 buildings in the city proper, and then we've got the other 12 buildings scattered around in the suburbs.
I've always loved Chicago. The architecture there is awesome. It's a great city. I always tell my wife, like whenever I do retire, I'd like to spend some of the time in Chicago.
Only in the summer.
Yeah, that's the time
Yeah,
I'm
don't
talking
come
about.
here in the winter.
Yeah, we
The winter's
came
not good.
we came in October for my dad's birthday 4 years ago. I think it was either 2020 or maybe the end of 21. And it was cold. It was as cold as you could believe. Snowing. That wind blows off the Great Lakes. It was chilly. I mean, it was a great time still, but it was cold.
So here's the third one. The third one is pick the right people. And believe it or not, that's the hardest one. I have a friend who invested with a group that he trusted, but he didn't know that well. He just went in with them. He didn't do the amount of homework that he should have. And it turns out that these guys were actually, to some degree, criminals. I can't tell you for sure to what degree, but doing your homework and picking the right people is incredibly difficult. It's the hardest one. It's easy to say I'm not going to borrow so much. I'm just going to raise more money for my investors. That you can do. That's something you can measure. So I go out and I buy a building, let's say for 12 million bucks, and I go and I raise 9 million and I borrow 3 million. That's a fact. Like those are
Yeah.
basics,
Uh-huh.
right? So I can raise the money. I can do my homework. I go door to door when I buy a building in the industrial park, and I talk to all 70 companies in that industrial park, and I talk to every tenant and every real industrial real estate broker. I belong to a group called SIOR, the Society of Industrial and Office Realtors. There's 2,000 members in the world, and they're the most knowledgeable people about industrial real estate. I can make 5 phone calls and learn about an industrial park from 5 people literally in a half a day. It's just knowing the resources to go to
Yeah.
to find out the market. But where the mistakes are made is you trust somebody because you think you should, and you don't have the right documentation, and or you don't do the right due diligence on them. And that's where everything goes to hell, is with the people. Because if you make mistakes, you borrow too much, bad. I'm not going to do that again. You don't do your due diligence. You don't do your homework. I always do that. I'm training a kid right now. He's a young man, Logan, works for my company, and he found a building that we think we're going to buy, and it's in a neighborhood in a town here called Addison. It's right near the airport. And yesterday I met with Logan and I said, show me the Google map of Addison and tell me every building there. I want to know who occupies them, what they paid for them, what the rents are in the area. I want to know, especially on the street where we're buying the building, who's there, who's thinking of moving, what did they pay for their buildings? And he looks at me like this. I said, Logan, it's malpractice to not be able to answer that. So you're being trained. I'm your mentor. I'm going with you this afternoon, and we're going to go to the street where we're buying the building, and I'm going to walk door to door with you, and we're going to go to every company on that street, and we're going to know everything happening on that street by the end of the day. And that's what we did yesterday. That's doing your homework.
And do you think you'll end up buying that building?
It's a little too expensive, and we're negotiating still. We're checking out some of the physical elements. We saw roofers on the roof there yesterday. Nobody told us there would be roofers, which means maybe the seller's trying to cover up some roof leaks.
Interesting. So I'm curious, you said that you see some similarities between now and 2007. Obviously, we just had our election last week, and so we now know, what have an idea of the direction of the next 4 years. So where are you at in your industry for the next 4 years? Are you bullish? Are you concerned? Like, what do you see happening overall in the economy in this next 4 years?
I'm always concerned. Always concerned. I listen to a podcast twice a week. It's called Thoughtful Money. The host is a fellow named Adam Taggart, and every episode he interviews a very highly sophisticated economist who talks about the economy. And the answer I can give you is he's got 30 economists who 15 of them say the economy is going to crash, 15 are saying it's going to go great, and then various gradations in between of how great or how crash.
So no one knows.
No one knows. No, and it's beyond anybody's control. No, Donald Trump does not control the economy. The economy is bigger than everybody. It's international. It's not national. Anything can happen. There's the Federal Reserve, and they pump money in and they print money, and then there's this whole thing with interest rates, and that's just a fraction of it. Our debt, we have debt that has to be owned by somebody. People have to buy our bonds. So the higher the risk, which is when the total of the amount we owe as a country, the national debt, we're spending $3 billion a day. If you go to the debt clock, $3 billion a day on interest on our debt.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, that could buy a lot of things if you didn't have the interest. But we're like a family that's making $100,000 a year that has
the Maserati, a fleet of them,
$3 million Visa bill.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That can't go on forever. That's called insolvent.
Yeah.
So the question is, how long can we lie to ourselves and say it's okay?
Yeah.
Something bad's going to happen. I don't know what it is. I don't know when it is. But the only thing I can control is what I do. I can't control what the economy does. So we're buying these buildings with little or no debt. So if the shit hits the fan, we are going to be comfortable enough to know we have the staying power that Karen will not be able to ever call me again.
Did COVID impact you guys at all? Did that have a big impact on your business?
It was great.
Really?
Oh my God. COVID was the best thing that ever happened to industrial.
Why is that?
Well,
prices dropped.
Everything's made in an industrial building, and everything's shipped through an industrial building. If you look around my office and you look around your studio, everything and anything in this world goes through an industrial building. Well, when there was a supply chain glitch during COVID, what happened was people stayed home. They started ordering stuff online. Who supplies stuff online? The guy that has the warehouse.
Yeah.
Amazon, Wayfair, every store. So as every store closed during COVID, you ever see that TV show, It's a Wonderful Life? Every time something dies, an angel gets
wings. Uh-huh.
I don't know. Anyway, every time a store closes, an industrial building gets leased. That's our business. So industrial properties have gone up from the beginning of COVID. A building worth $1 million has gone up to $1.6 million in the last 4 years.
Wow, that's amazing.
And it's only gotten better. I'll tell you why. People who worked in offices during COVID, they stayed home. But if you worked in a chicken plant, You can't stay home. Chickens don't cut themselves up and get packaged.
Oh, and I guess that's the difference, right? Because I was thinking just like commercial buildings, but you're industry
Oh,
specific.
I
So
hate office buildings. I've hated office buildings since my original mentor and boss told me office buildings are for the idiots. So and so office buildings, when an office tenant leaves, generally they have to tear out almost every wall and every door and all the carpet and all the ceilings and all the HVAC and rebuild it for the new tenant.
yeah,
In industrial, it's a small little office in the front and a warehouse in the back. What do you think we have to do to make it ready for a tenant?
clean it.
Nothing.
Yeah.
The tenant who moves out has to clean it. It's in his lease.
Brilliant.
So commercial is made up of a bunch of things. And one of them is retail. Well, that's been sucking eggs because people aren't shopping, they're ordering online.
Yeah.
That's why malls are in so much trouble. Office buildings are half empty and 2/3 empty because people work at home.
What do you think happens to malls?
Oh, shit. I don't know. I'm telling you, this whole economy is like teetering on all these things. You could ask about all the negative things and nobody knows what's going to happen. What's going to happen to all the empty office buildings in the downtown areas in every city in the country?
Well, I went to Portland this summer, and I'd been there in February of 2020. So before COVID had hit, I went to Portland. I was like, oh, this place is awesome. It's like lively, and there was all this activity. And we landed at like 9, got downtown about like 9:30, 10 o'clock, and it was like a ghost town. It's like it had no personality because all the homeless people were still asleep. And so you didn't have to worry about them. And then there were no, like, we went to the coffee shop, nobody was there. It's like it wasn't inhabited because all the people who would have driven in from the suburbs to work in the buildings weren't there anymore. And it was oddly eerie how empty the city was.
Yeah, and by the way, office buildings in all the suburbs are struggling as well. There are very few office buildings doing well. I just read an article today that these wealthy families in New York who've had these giant office buildings for generations, 60, 80 years, the kids were so rich, they were getting money from rents coming in, so they didn't have to work. Kids were in Hawaii, the kids were living in, I don't know, Panama, wherever they were, and they didn't have to work because great grandpa built or bought these office buildings. And now these same families are having to write checks to keep them and not let the lender foreclose on them. Remember what I told you about what happened with me with Karen in 2008?
Yeah.
Well, that's what's happening. Karen's in charge of all these people now.
That's wild. Yeah,
She's their boss. She's their boss. They are a slave to her because they have all this debt.
Well, and then they're having to do all these deals that are so non-cash productive for them because they just need something.
Well, in most cases, they can't afford to. So they're just giving buildings back. It's called jingle mail. It's when you mail the keys back to the lender. Jingle, jingle. And the lender takes the keys back and now they own it. It's their problem. And these lenders are very often insurance companies, pension funds. The people who make these $80 million and $200 million loans are not banks. Sometimes they are, but mostly they're not.
And so I have a question. After your partnership with Dave, did you ever enter? I mean, I know you've got like investors, but did you ever enter another partnership again?
I have a new one with Eric.
Okay.
And it's a very different partnership than I had with Dave. I wrote the partnership agreement with my lawyer and I showed it to Eric and I explained the reasons why I needed it to be a certain way. And he knew the Dave story. I explained it in great detail.
Yeah.
And it's still not easy. There's nothing easy about partnership. You know, why do half of the marriages in the United States end in divorce? Because partnerships are hard.
Yeah.
And partnerships between a husband and a wife, that's hard. It's really hard. And so
and we don't have agreements. We'd be better off. We'd probably have a higher success rate in marriages if we signed an operations agreement like we do with our business partners that outline things before we get in it.
People do. Yeah. Those are called prenuptial agreements.
Yeah.
They exist. Yeah, but that's a whole separate issue. But business marriages are usually difficult when something goes bad. They're often difficult when things go well. But at least in a marriage, until it goes bad, there's sex. There's no sex. There's no sex in a business partnership.
Oh, that's
So
hilarious. So you do
yeah,
have a partner now with Eric. You just handle that much differently. I will say the first like official business ever, first business partnership I ever had was for a rental car business that we did. And my business partner, I had two, one of them being my business partner, Breck, I had my company with. And he had done a lot of businesses up to that point. And so he had an attorney write up an operating agreement. And I was like, that's stupid. Like, we're just buddies. Like, I own 33, you own 33, you own 33. Like, it's all good, you know? And I remember we paid, I can't remember how much it was, a couple $1,000s maybe. And I was like, what a waste of money. But now I will never go into another partnership without involving attorneys and having an operating agreement because I've now learned how important they are. But in the very beginning, I felt like, oh, what a silly thing to have. Now, after going through what I have, I realize how valuable they are.
right. And the biggest problem with these business partnership agreements is you can't really anticipate what you haven't experienced before. So you think you're covering everything, but you're not. Because the thing that comes up is the thing you forgot or that you didn't realize you should put in there.
Oh, for sure.
These are so complicated, these relationships with business partners. Uh, my relationship with Eric is a different one than with Dave, because Dave and I were equal partners with a lot of experience. When he became my partner, we had already bought a lot of properties together where I was his boss.
Yeah.
And in the case of Eric, we've been together for 6 years and I'm the senior partner. I'm much older. So he's not as threatened by me. He's looking more, and I am too, like he's part of the succession plan when I get sick or die, which is going to happen unless he goes first. He's part of the succession plan. He's like a vice president more than he's like a partner.
Sure.
But he's a partner. He shares in profits, but the decision making is interesting. It's how do you make decisions and how do you share profits and how do you share losses? That's called governance. That's called the governance element of a partnership agreement. Those are the three most important things. And the fourth most important thing, and people forget it, is what's the termination agreement? If the partnership terminates, what's the agreement? People forget that. They say, well, we're partners.
It's kind of like a prenup. They're like, I don't want to talk about that because then we're being negative and saying it might fail. But
that's right.
Odds are the partnership's going to end at some point.
That's right. So the termination agreement happens to be as much of an important clause in the agreement as how you make decisions and how you split profits and losses. Because in the end, if it's a big fight, you're going to give back a lot of that money to lawyers.
Yeah, that's a great point. Save yourself some money up front. Well, Joel, this has been a fascinating conversation. We took gambling in business and ran the gamut with it. I absolutely loved it. I can't let you leave, though, without asking you, how do you define success?
It's all relationships. My relationships are my gold.
Yeah, you really elaborated that with that group that you're in and the ability that it gives you. And what's fascinating, too, listening to you talk, is how you go and you talk to everyone on the street and you beat the pavement and you knock the doors. And I think you had mentioned earlier, you're 65 and you're still out there showing and mentoring and showing Logan like how to make it happen, you know? And I think so many people who end up in a position like you wouldn't go and still knock those doors. They just tell Logan to, but you went and showed him how to do it. And that's really going to allow your company to succeed whenever the time is that you do decide you don't want to be a part of it.
Yeah, it's really important. I'm not afraid to go.
How long do you hope to work for? Like, do you have any?
Well, this is a great one. This is a great one. My original mentor in business, who I went to work for at age 22, who's coming to my house tomorrow. Today was his birthday, 78. I'm still close with him. He still invests with me. So today he retired. Today, on his birthday, he retired at age 78. But my other mentor, who has never retired, who I have breakfast with every Saturday morning to talk business and to talk social and family. His name is Nate. He's 97.
Oh my gosh.
Retired. Not fully retired.
Wow. I want to be like Nate.
Everyone wants to be like Nate.
Well, Joel, thank you so much. If the audience out here is listening and they're like, I want to give Joel money and invest and buy properties, what's the best way for someone to get in touch with you?
Our website is Brit Properties, BRIT with one T, properties.com.
Okay, well, I will put that website in the show notes. I'll put your LinkedIn in the show notes. And you got a YouTube channel too, Investing with Joel. So I'll be sure to include that. Hell of a great conversation, Joel. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for taking the time today to be with us.
Thank you, Cody.
All right, well, take care.